Welcome to A Theology of Holy Resistance. This is a podcast dedicated to exploring important ideas in the Christian tradition that are dedicated to the protection of democracy, the uplifting of the oppressed, and the preservation of Christian humility in an era and an age when these virtues are being forgotten in the American population. I'm your host, JT Martin, and I'm excited to launch this project with all of you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first community AMA. I am your host, JT Martin. I run the Queer and Affirming Theologies Discord as well as the Theology of a Holy Resistance podcast and blog. Today we are going to be talking about Alice Walker on Responsibility to the Natural World is an article on Life Worth Living, an initiative of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to read through this article, and then we're going to talk about some questions in the article. And then eventually, all of you lovely people who are my audience haphazardly will hear about this and interact with it in the ways that you tend to. I'm really excited about this. And next month, we're going to be doing Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail. And so I put forward to you this article from Life Worth Living, answering the question, who do we answer to? Alice Walker on Responsibility to the Natural World. It is said that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. In the same vein, Alice Walker reminds us that to the environment, humans exist as one collective force, with all of us holding a collective responsibility to care for our world. After a conversation with the trees, she comes to a series of realizations about human environmental impact. The summer before this encounter, I lived in the northern hills of California, where much logging is done. Well, said the trees, you butcher us, you burn us, you grow us only to destroy us. But I, as an individual, am innocent, I said. Though it did occur to me that I live in a wood house, I eat on a wood table, I sleep on a wood bed. But finally, after much discourse, I understood what the trees were telling me. Being an individual doesn't matter. Just as human beings perceive all trees as one, didn't a U.S. official say recently that when you've seen one tree, you've seen them all? All human beings to the trees are one. We are judged by our worst collective behavior since it is so vast, not by our singular best. The earth holds us responsible for our crimes against it, not as individuals but as a species. This was the message of the trees. I found it to be a terrifying thought, for I'd assumed that the earth, the spirit of the earth, noticed exceptions, those who wantonly damage it and those who do not. But the earth is wise, it has given itself into the keeping of all, and all are therefore accountable. Alice Walker, Living by the Word, pages 141 through 142. This was an immensely fascinating article for me to read. This was kind of a first real chance to engage with some of the uh, breadth and depth of her thought and her work on ecology. Um, so, for context, I was working on a paper that was looking at the way that womanist theology um, kind of assumes a certain eco-theological lens because of their adoption of so much of Alice Walker's literary corpus, both fiction and nonfiction. And so this is something that I was like really excited by. And I ended up using this passage a whole lot in the paper and just kind of reflecting on this article in that process. But here are kind of the questions that I think are really worth thinking about. Have you ever felt responsible for the actions of someone else? I think, yeah. I think a hard part with human behavior and human psychology, though, is that we also have to give ourselves space. We can't hold ourselves accountable for other people's behavior necessarily in all situations. I think that there's maybe a distinct nuance between what Alice Walker is getting at and maybe what this question is asking. I think that to understand that we are part of a communal existence is one thing. I think to then say that we bear the responsibility for the worst of each other's actions is, I think, maybe a step too far, but that's just my opinion. Um, I know some lovely people who disagree with me on that front. Um, but at the same time, I think, we can look at, I have this opinion, right? Well, now here I am bucking up against it. Um, we have this kind of situation with Trump being elected the 47th president of the United States. His inauguration was yesterday. And I think that one of the things that is just really, really weird about all of it is that, in a way, I think some of us have gone through this experience of like feeling like we either didn't do enough advocacy or activism in the years preceding this election, like, or just that somehow our behavior wasn't enough to counteract the behavior that made his election possible. It was a very narrow win, a little bit larger on the electoral level, but it was a 2 million vote difference, which, given the population of the United States, is very, very small. And so this was just, I still, this was a really, really, I think this is an important question in the context of the election. Um, because I think in one sense there is this tendency to maybe try to avoid responsibility. This is something I've wrestled with personally. Um, Trying to avoid ownership of the fact that if I am an American citizen, there is a sense in which, after the results of the election, I de facto owe allegiance to the presidency in some sense. And that makes me extremely uncomfortable. And so I try to avoid thinking about that in a lot of ways. But as I sit here and I wrestle with it, I think I am maybe gaining a better understanding of what my responsibility as a citizen is in this country. I think that one of the most challenging things that's kind of in front of me, things that I've yet to do that I'm just beginning, as it were, I have to learn how to actively demonstrate defiance as civic engagement. So for me, one of the ways that I'm thinking about doing this is really kind of working with my local colleagues and my local networks to put on some kind of either letter writing campaign or maybe I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be something. And really try to put together this, or put into action this idea of a pursuit of justice, in response to the um, just the bigotry. Let's call it what it is. It's the bigotry. And so here I am sitting now as a queer theologian, and I feel it viscerally a responsibility for the fact that Trump was elected a second time. I had the really unintended influence of causing a cluster of college students to develop really conservatively theologically. Not that I wasn't the influence, so I'm not going to claim any sort of primary credit, but I was an influencing voice and I was definitely very conservative at that time. And so I do wonder how many people I unknowingly influenced in college that ultimately contributed to the Trump vote. And I feel, as a result of that influence, I feel somewhat responsible. Um, and so that's a large part of why, like, all of these initiatives have started. This is why I've started doing this process, why I've started doing this work, is that I feel some kind of responsibility to do something, because when I wasn't paying attention to my actions, I did do things that had consequences. And so while I can't necessarily take those actions back, I think there is a real sense in which I can try to do the work that maybe bridges the gap, or that maybe um kind of counteracts the consequences of actions that I've taken previously. And so I think that, this dove ends into the second question of how would your life have to change if you accept responsibility, not just for your own actions, but for those of others, even for humanity itself. And so I think, thinking about this, there's kind of three sub questions that pop up into my head. There is this question of, well, okay, what does it mean to accept responsibility in a psychologically healthy manner for other people? Like, that's a big thing that therapists are, like, opposed to, and psychologists. And so there is this question that I have of, like, one, what does it do therapeutically and psychologically if you shift to a more communal oriented mindset and you're not as individualistic? Like, what happens there? How does your therapy work change, and things of that nature? And so that's something I'm going to be exploring with my therapist in conversation in the future, is just, like, kind of like trying to work through this concept of accepting responsibility at a human and um communal level. And so I can't speak to how that would change my life, but I know there would be a conversation and there would be a change. I think that second, there is this consideration of a greater engagement with activism. And this is something I've started to see in my own work. Smaller things at the moment, but also just larger things as well. I think intentionally participating in things that um try to affect change in ways that maintain the environment and maintain nature, but that also are beneficial to society. And then I think third, really the hardest thing, is trying to come up with a response to just the absolute nihilism that comes with this, like, reality that if you plot the influence of humanity towards each other and on creation, we haven't really done a whole lot of good. And I think that one of the hardest points is figuring out how to overcome that nihilism, and how to overcome the feeling like nothing is going to make anything better. Like, we can't necessarily solve everything, but what's one thing we can be working on? And so this is where I think I maybe diverge, where I diverge from Alice Walker. I think that in a way we are judged by our collective worst, but I also think that historically what we tend to look at in history is we tend to look at the way that people tried to affect positive change. And we see this in the ways that people who have tried to do good things almost end up getting depicted like they weren't complicit in harmful cultures. This is really common with, like, somebody like John Wesley and others in church history, where because they tried to like help certain things, they get this wider vision of being better than they were. And so I think that this also shows that humans have a tendency to overemphasize or maybe over recognize the good that people do. And so I think that maybe a middle ground here is maybe taking that impulse and using it to help us grow and become more willing to recognize when we are making effective change, even at a very, very small level. Um, Honestly, I don't know if I can predict how my relationships with other people would change if I accepted an account of collective responsibility. And so that's just a hard question, you know. And for context, the question is, how would your relationships with others change if you accepted this account of collective responsibility? I don't know. I don't even know how to have an idea of that. But I think this last question is something worth really considering. Take a moment to consider some of the most prominent elements of the natural world near you. If these beings could talk, what would they say? I live in what feels like a concrete jungle. I live in an apartment complex near football stadiums and a whole host of other things, and nature is not super duper present, but I there are these trees planted along the sidewalk of my apartment complex, and it's winter right now, and so they are, I mean, really, they're really sparse. They don't have any leaves. And so one of the thing and thinking about them, intentionally slowing down, I think the one thing that kind of crosses my mind every time I see them, every time that I kind of sit with them before I get out of the car, is it's this question of, you know, what is the benefit of silence? What do you learn by being silent? What do you learn by being kind of at the will of the environment and the weather around you? And this is something I've wrestled with for a long time. I it brings me back to the first time I read The Sayings of the Desert Mother and Fathers by Henry Nouwen. Um, I forgot the title of the book, but that's kind of like the content he was dealing with. And that book really challenged me. It forced me to kind of confront that I have a tendency to be really loud and be really talkative, and I don't take as much time to be silent and listen as I need to. And that's something I'm working on. That's something I'm trying to grow in, and which is really counterintuitive to like be trying to work on that while also be trying to work on a podcast and things like that. But for me, podcasting, and the all of these different community building endeavors that I'm trying to put together are me practicing the ability of facilitating conversation. Um, I want to help start conversations. I don't think that I have the final word really on anything that I look into. I just want to help people start conversations that can maybe help them grow or become more articulate in their ability to be affirming of queer and trans people and really any alternative sexuality or gender expression. But also, I want to help people understand that there is a very real way in which our theological work to grow in Christ and grow with one another in community is a form of political resistance. It is a form of holy resistance in response to individuals in the church or without the church that, and really in and outside of various faiths that seek to use or weaponize faith as a tool of oppression. And so growing in Christ and with Christ and in community and with community is an active form of resistance to that use of faith. And I want to help people grow in that. I want to help people grow in their skills in that and in their habits in that. And so that's where these community Q&As are going to come from, is that this is me taking, the people in the Discord, uh for the Queer and Affirming Theologies Discord, through devotional material that I use in my life, that I use to reflect and grow on these things. This is time to come together as community once a month. And I really hope to see more people there next time. But with that, we've talked about the article. I've said my piece. This is it. I'll see you next time in a Theology of Holy Resistance. We've got some really cool episodes coming out. Bye.